You typically don't find players to be excited about with the 19th overall pick in the NBA draft, but in the case of the Atlanta Hawks and their power forward John Collins, seems we got something interesting going on. What immediately jumps out at me with Collins, and I think this would go for everybody, is of course the athleticism. Dude can get up there. He's already had a number of alley-oop finishes this year. He's dunked on a couple of guys. He had a big dunk in the Hawks' surprise victory over the Cleveland Cavaliers. He had a few against the Pistons last night. Collins is pretty impressive when it comes to attacking the rim, usually off of rolls or in transition. The majority of his shots come at the basket, and he's actually shooting 60% at the rim right now, which is pretty impressive. And the next question I would ask is the point guard Dennis Schroeder, is he the right guy to be making these plays to Collins? Because of course you're going to need a point guard who can actually be a playmaker, and I think Schroeder in the past has shown some signs of maybe being a little shot happy. But at the same time, you know, he's in a good system and with a good head coach, and Schroeder's talented, so I'd like to think that he can be the point guard that can really allow John Collins to be special when it comes to his ability to roll to the rim. So we'll just have to wait and see on him. And the other ability that he really uses this athleticism well for is on the offensive boards. John Collins is already averaging 3.3 offensive rebounds a game, which is tied for 8th place among the best offensive rebounders in the league. I mean, when you're able to be that effective on the boards and constantly be that physical around the rim and just always being a pest, I mean, we've seen the impact that that can make for someone like a Tristan Thompson or an Andre Drummond or a DeAndre Jordan, where even if you're not necessarily the best offensive player in the world in terms of your shooting and ball handling and things like that, and I'm not saying Collins can't be that. In fact, we're going to talk about those two specific skill sets later on. You could just always be someone the defense has to pay attention to because they have to box you out, you know? Now, if we look at his defense, I would like to believe that his size at 6'10", around 235 pounds, combined with his physical nature, would allow him to be a quality defensive player. Kind of reminds me of like Serge Ibaka potential. He's already averaging over 1 block shot a game, which, of course, that's not the only thing when it comes to defense, but it's a decent sign nonetheless that he's able to deflect some shots away from some veteran NBA players around the basket. It's a good sign, you know? So you combine that with a few years of seasoning, as well as Mike Budenholzer being his coach, that Serge Ibaka comparison, it could be a real thing. It's a little bit of wishful thinking on my part, but who knows? But we got to get to some of the areas where I believe he'd have to put a bit more work into. Number one is shooting. And I think a lot of this is going to be determined by whether Collins should be a power forward or a center. I think he's naturally a power forward. His size would indicate power forward, but the Hawks have been using him at the center position some. And if he's going to play the 4, then the shooting is going to be more of a requirement. And while he hasn't taken that many mid-range jumpers this season, he's actually shot well on them when he has taken them. And what may be the biggest sign that he could grow into a good shooter is that he's a good free throw shooter. He's shooting over 70% at the line this season, so maybe he has that in him, and he just needs to work on it a little bit more. If the three-pointer can become a thing, that would be great as well. And then there's also the ball handling. Can he get his Draymond Green on? Because if Collins already has a really good ability of rolling to the rim, could he also become a quality pick-and-pop player as well, whether it be the defense leaving him open and then he could shoot a jump shot, or giving him a lane to the basket, and then hopefully with a developed ball handling ability, he could attack a closeout if the opposing big man comes over to try to stop him, or maybe the defense would just completely leave him and then he could go into the teeth of the defense and make a play for himself or potentially someone else. Basically what I'm saying is Collins has to get better at all the other things not centered around athleticism. And based on just his first season alone, you would think that as long as he can make some okay strides as a shooter and a ball handler, he could be a really quality power forward in the NBA. So the potential is definitely there for Collins. I guess my concerns would be if he's just too far away as a ball handler and a shooter. But again, that free throw shooting makes me believe that it's not going to take too long for him to really develop more skills. But we also need to talk about the type of players you should have around him. The one positive lineup that the Hawks have with Collins in the game is when he's next to Luke Babbitt. I mean, that might be a telling sign right there. Luke Babbitt's been knocking down a lot of his three-pointers to open up this season. Maybe a shooting big next to Collins would be best because, you know, you have the power forward to space the floor out. And given that Mike Budenholzer is the head coach here, you know that he's going to find ways to get Babbitt and other big shooters some open looks. And then you could have Collins as the center who's more oriented at going to the basket. And I did use the word center on that one because I do think at times he could play the 5 position because he's just seems really effective on one side of the floor at the rim, that's offensively, and I think defensively he's got a lot of potential as well. But if he could develop those power forward abilities, the shooting and the ball handling, then you could see him on the floor with a guy like Dwayne Dedmon, you know, who can only play the center position. So it's going to be interesting to see. You know, I think Collins, the athleticism is definitely there, and I think if he can develop those other abilities, he can become a really versatile player for the Atlanta Hawks.